Another day of utter turmoil for the government. The Home Secretary's resigned and more cabinet ministers are on resignation watch. There was chaos over a fracking vote and the Prime Minister was forced to make another promise, this time on pensions. So, is it nearly all over for Liz Truss? Tonight, Liz Truss is trying to keep the show on the road. Grant Shapps is now the Home Secretary.
Interesting circumstances to be taking over as Home Secretary.
Well, let's see what happens, shall we?
You're supporting Liz Truss.
Also this evening, we are live in Sunderland with an audience of under 30s to hear what their lives are like, how the crisis in the cost of living is affecting their futures, and to find out what they think of the government turmoil of today, yesterday, Monday, last Friday and the last few weeks. We'll speak to one influential Tory MP who insists Liz Truss can still survive in number 10. And as the Home Secretary quits, we'll hear from Labour's opposite number. And on the day inflation reached a new high, how do the life chances of under 30s here compare to the rest of the country?
Responsibilities of being able to pay for food and just the basics, and I think we're really struggling with that.
Good evening. Welcome to Newsnight. Tonight we are with an audience of voters, all under the age of 30, broadcasting live from Sunderland. As part of a day of BBC programmes from the area, we are here with our audience who are going to talk to you tonight about how the crisis around being able to afford to live is affecting them and how the last few weeks of chaos have directly impacted them. And obviously, we are going to talk to them about the latest tumultuous events at Westminster today, which honestly can feel like a parallel universe when you compare it to how people are trying to survive and get on with their lives here. So today, the Home Secretary quit over a security breach, pointedly saying that she accepted responsibility for her mistake and had therefore resigned, directly implying that her boss, Liz Truss, hadn't. Later, Tory MPs said the Chief Whip had resigned, until eventually Downing Street confirmed that she remains in post. Nick Watt is in Downing Street. Nick, what's going on?
Well, Victoria, I came here 25 years ago and I have never seen anything like this. Now, let's be careful about making predictions, but I have to say this does look remarkably like a government that is falling apart in front of our eyes. Because what we saw in the last few hours is that Liz Truss appears not to be able to run a government at a tactical level or at a strategic level. Tactically, there was that vote in the House of Commons. Was it a confidence issue? Would you end your career as a Conservative MP forever if you voted against the government? It was unclear. There was mayhem in the division lobbies and problems about running a government strategically, because that was a vote on fracking. Liz Truss is in favour of fracking. It goes to the heart of her pro-growth agenda, but you don't have to know the Conservative Party very well to know that if you put fracking in front of Conservative MPs, a lot of them are going to say no to that. It does feel tonight as if we're moving in the direction of some sort of council of elders having a pretty awkward conversation with the Prime Minister in the not too distant future. The message from her side is this is a fighter, this is a Prime Minister who will continue to fight on. But there is absolute dismay across her party. There was a very emotional appearance on the BBC by Sir Charles Walker. He's a former veteran of the 1922 committee, and he was essentially saying all those people who voted for Liz Truss, all those people who took cabinet jobs for Liz Truss, look at the damage that you have done to my party, is what he was saying. So, Victoria, here's how this extraordinary day unfolded. All friends so recently. High hopes for a new era. But now a cabinet falling apart after the sacking of the Chancellor, the dramatic departure today of the Home Secretary, and uncertainty about the future of the Chief Whip. Wendy Morton, nominally in charge of discipline, in trouble after discipline broke down. A threat by the government to terminate the careers of its MPs who didn't support them on fracking was rescinded at the last minute in the face of a major rebellion. Reports of shouting matches amongst ministers and their backbenchers, some scenes caught by a Labour veteran.
I saw members being physically manhandled into another lobby and being bullied.
This is the command and control centre of one of the world's largest and richest democracies. But tonight, this is the command and control centre of a government which needs to show it is not disintegrating in front of our eyes. It was a normal start to the day for Suella Braverman, out on patrol, but then resigning after admitting she had sent a sensitive government document to a backbench colleague. An innocent breach, thought Braverman. A serious matter, thought the Prime Minister, who's clashed with her former Home Secretary over government plans to liberalise immigration rules. Cue an arch critic of the Prime Minister as her replacement. Grant Shapps, or should I say Home Secretary?
Hi Nick, how are you doing?
I'm very well, how are you?
Good, you're always here whenever I come down the street. It's good to see you.
Interesting circumstances to be taking over as Home Secretary?
Well, let's see what happens, shall we?
You're supporting Liz Truss? Confirmed in his role and emerging into the twilight. Into Downing Street on foot, out in an armour-plated car. The new elevated status of Grant Shapps, a pivotal figure in this cabinet and now potentially a central figure in deciding the future of Liz Truss.
I was a Conservative MP for 10 years. I've been a journalist for about 20, comment editor of the Daily Telegraph, a great Tory institution, and I'm now the editor of Conservative Home. And in all that time, I have never seen anything like the chaos of today.
And the Conservative Party's chief chronicler is not giving the Prime Minister long.
I have to say, if you're looking for a coalition of chaos, Liz Truss is a one woman. If the Conservative Party wants some semblance of order and to communicate the opposite of the chaos it's been communicating ever since Liz Truss became Tory leader, I'm just asking this as a question because I don't know the answer, but has it got any alternative but to send for Rishi Sunak?
A veteran Whitehall watcher is flabbergasted by the day's events.
In terms of, turmoil upon turmoil at breakneck speed. Maybe that's because everything is speeded up these days with 24/7 media and things like that. But things falling apart at this speed, I think, is unprecedented in British government. I can't remember anything like it.
A Prime Minister in her place. A Prime Minister determined to fight on. But a Prime Minister with authority slipping away.
To me or anybody, whatever you want. Yeah. Well, let's hear from members of our audience in Sunderland tonight, an audience of under 30s. Good evening.
Hi, good evening. My name's Hayley Marsden. I'm 26 years old and I'm a trainee educational psychologist.
What's the last few weeks been like for you?
The last few weeks have just been filled with so much uncertainty for me. I feel like I'm having to change my life plans. I'm really having to seriously think about my financial situation. Do you
live with flatmates?
Yes, so I live with 2 flatmates and we're having to make, huge sacrifices just to make sure that we can take on what for us at the moment is a really uncertain bill profile, just to make sure that we can make ends meet. We're all diving into our savings, but we are so fortunate that we've got them as a bit of a pillar to fall back on, which isn't the reality for, a lot of the children and families that I work with every day and speak to every day who aren't in such a fortunate financial situation, who are just slipping further and further into poverty.
And in your house, what sort of decisions are you making when it comes to making the money stretch farther?
Absolutely. We're having to really consciously think about, everything in terms of bills. We don't know what bills are coming through the door, over the next few months with, unplugging everything, turning everything off as you'd expect. We're all eating and cooking together. And, we have made the decision, to turn the heating off and all sit together and watch a film under blankets, just to make sure that we can, get through over the next few months, years and, survive into the future.
Thank you, Hayley. Hi, good evening.
Hi, I'm Joshua Holmes-Cassie. I'm 24 and I'm a test analyst.
And how's it been for you the last few weeks?
I wouldn't say the last few weeks, I'd say the last couple of years. We've had basically turmoil over the last 2 years and with the pandemic and now this merry-go-round of chaos with the new government.
What do you think of it?
They weren't elected previously, and now they've gone from having a manifesto in 2019 under Boris Johnson to completely ripping up to the most unelectable Prime Minister that's existed in our lifetime.
Okay. Do you want to pass the microphone down this way? Scott, hello, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. My name's Scott, I'm 27, I'm from Newcastle, I'm learning support assistant in a primary school.
You're a teaching assistant, you're also a member of the Conservative Party. What's it like supporting the Conservatives at the moment?
I think it's fair to say that we've had a rough few weeks in the party over the last few weeks, but the one thing about the Conservative Party is that in the worst of times, we were always able to come together to unite.
Are you joking?
No.
where are you seeing the party coming together to unite?
I think, you know, the Prime Minister has apologised for the mistakes that have been made.
It's not making any difference. You've seen what's happened in Westminster today.
So I think, yes, I think she has apologised. I think we are the Conservative Unionist Party. I think it's going to be very interesting over the next few days when hopefully we'll be able to do what we set out to do and unite and take the country forward.
Okay. Thank you. We'll hear much more from our audience. Thank you so far. We're going to speak now to David Simmons, who is the Tory MP for Ruislip, Northwood and Pinner, who sits on the Backbench 1922 Executive Committee. Mr Simmons, I don't know if you heard members of our audience here, but they're really hacked off. And I wonder, don't you think people, at the very least in this country, deserve a functioning government?
Hayley and the issues that she's just described are very much at the forefront of the minds of people in Parliament at the moment. And I think we're all extremely frustrated that the dramas that we've seen have got in the way. But it's clear that votes like the one that took place tonight, the mini budget, the statement from the new Chancellor announced earlier in the week, are all about trying to make sure that household finances, that family finances in this country are supported. They will do that. And also that they're built on sound foundations, so that things like our approach to helping people with energy costs, our approach to making sure that pensioners have the income that they need, are based on sound long-term finances for the country. And that's what the Conservative Party fundamentally is here to do.
There is nothing sound about your government right now. When are you going to put Liz Truss out of her misery?
The policies are the important thing. And I think, as I've said many times and many colleagues have said, we've just been through a leadership election. We recognise that the circumstances that the country faces, partly as a consequence of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, but also a result of decisions like the rise in US interest rates, which are driving up interest rates in every country in the world, are going to be a huge challenge.
Mr. Simmons, come on, you know the mini budget is directly responsible, in part, for the rise in mortgage and borrowing rates that we are seeing, that people here in Sunderland are being affected by. And an apology does not help people pay those higher mortgage payments.
So it's clear that the mini budget didn't help, and that's why it was scrapped. But it's also clear that the challenges facing the government of the UK are, for example, much, much smaller than the challenges facing our counterparts in the G7, countries like Italy and France have a much bigger gap to fill when it comes to managing the day-to-day finances of their government. So we need to make sure that the policies that have been announced, and I very much support what was said by the new Chancellor earlier in the week, help to bring down those borrowing costs, stabilise those borrowing costs. Many of us in this country have mortgages. We're all being affected by this. For those in low incomes, it's a particular issue. And when we look at things like what's happening with the global gas prices, that's beginning to come down. That will feed into energy costs. The government is making a number of policy decisions that are designed to help support household budgets and family finances.
Suella Braverman, when she resigned as Home Secretary, said, "I accept responsibility, I resign." She's saying Liz Truss should resign.
The Home Secretary, the former Home Secretary, broke the rules that went with her ministerial office, and she accepted that that was a resignation issue, which anybody who signs up to that ministerial code knew. I think in the case of the Prime Minister and other ministers across government, there's a big difference where it's an issue of making a mistake in good faith. I think she set out with a set of policies that she hoped would boost the incomes of people in this country, that would help our economy.
Sorry, I'm going to pause you there. I'm going to pause you there, Mr. Simmons. I'm going to pause you there. making a mistake in good faith. Do you think that is any consolation to people who are facing higher mortgage payments, for example?
Well, it's clear that the decision which was made swiftly to change direction will help those people, and it's a recognition that international financial markets ultimately have a significant impact on people's household budgets in this country. And it's right, if government comes up with an innovation, something it thinks will help, and it turns out to be wrong, that they change direction. It was very clear earlier in the week that there was broad cross-party support across all the political groups in Parliament for the direction of travel that Jeremy Hunt set out as a Chancellor. And it's one which I support, and I know my constituents will feel the benefit of that in their wage packets and in their household budgets.
Do you mean all this, Mr. Simmons? Are you genuine? Are you honestly speaking to our audience across the country and to our voters here in Sunderland? You think Liz Truss is the right woman for the job?
Well, my view is the issue here is about policy. The Conservative Party needs to be a pragmatic government.
But I would like you to answer that question, if you would.
Well, my view is that the policy is what matters.
Is Liz Truss the right woman for the job?
Can be delivered. Well, I met with the Prime Minister last night. She set out her plans, her proposals to address the concerns that many of us have. I'm quite happy to give her the time to do that. And I think the announcements that were set out by the Chancellor to address the real, genuine worries that many of my constituents, lots of people across the country have about household finances are the right policies. And I'm giving them the time to show that they're benefiting my constituents, benefiting all the people that I hear from.
We've had the fourth Conservative Prime Minister in 6 years. We've had the fourth Conservative Home Secretary in 4 years. We've had the fourth Conservative Chancellor in 4 months. To quote Liz Truss from an old speech of hers, that is a disgrace.
Well, turnover of ministers in politics can be a challenge. I know I spent many years in local government dealing with lots of different ministers, often with a very short shelf life during the Labour years. Now, clearly, governments, prime ministers need to appoint the people that they feel are best able to deal with the challenges that they face at a given time. My view is, since realising that things were not going in the right direction, the Prime Minister has made some wise appointments. I support those people in getting on with the job. And clearly, we need to make sure that in the context where an awful lot is happening, Putin continues his aggression in Ukraine, the international economic outlook is uncertain, and that's blowing a chill wind towards every household in the UK, that we can provide the stability and the certainty that people like Hayley have exactly described they want to see from their government.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simmons. Thanks for talking to us. We're going to bring in the Shadow Home Secretary, Labour's Yvette Cooper now. Yvette Cooper, how are you going to get a general election?
Good evening, Victoria. I mean, it's been just total chaos today. I think the Conservative Party has to take some responsibility for this. The government is effectively falling apart when you've got the Home Secretary sacked today, the Chancellor sacked 5 days ago, the Chief Whip apparently sacked and then unsacked in the course of the chaos this evening. They were only appointed 6 weeks ago. They're clearly not fit to govern, but that is not fair on people right across the country, people who you were talking to earlier, who've got mortgage payments going up and really worried about how on earth they're going to pay for them, worried about how to pay their heating bills, worried about crime and antisocial behaviour. And there's no focus from this government on people across the country who need support because they're just fighting among themselves in this chaos.
How are you going to get a general election?
Well, we need the Conservative Party members, some of the MPs that you will have heard from, who do recognise that this is all falling apart, to actually put the interests of the country first, to actually do something in the national interest and accept that we need a general election. They simply cannot carry on with this kind of chaos. And it's not just Liz Truss. We had chaos under Boris Johnson, the run-up to him standing down as well. We've had 12 years of the Conservatives doing huge damage to our country. We set out alternative Labour plans for the future, for growth. I just think we need a grown-up approach again that is about looking out for the issues facing the country rather than just this squabbling and chaos amongst themselves.
You keep saying you want a general election, your party does, your leader does. Are you actually ready, though? Because you haven't given voters any detailed costings about many of your plans.
Well, we've set out a whole series of detailed plans, and everything that we've set out has been fully costed. So, for example, I set out plans for 13,000 additional neighbourhood police and PCSOs on the streets as part of our Home Affairs policy, cost £360 million, and we set out how we would fund it through a new change to policing procurement across the 43 forces that would save that money. Across the board, we set out proposals for investing in additional nurses and doctors, medical training places, funded by cancelling the non-dom status, which is an unfair tax privilege. So we've set out those things. But you're right, in the long term, you've also got to get growth.
Well, let me ask
that's why we've also set out proposals for green growth and a fairer future for our country as well.
Indeed. Everybody wants growth. You say you will borrow shed loads for your climate plan, £28 billion a year. You say that borrowing will lead to growth. Aren't you going to scare the markets like Liz Truss did?
Well, I think Rachel Reeves has set out a very serious and responsible approach to fiscal rules, to sound money as well. And what they did in that mini budget that's been so devastating.
It's borrowing.
But the point of what they did in that mini budget was to ignore fiscal rules, to ignore them, ignore the important Office of Budget Responsibility, the economic and financial institutions. They had been dismissing the Bank of England, and that instability.
I'm asking about your plan. Just let me ask you about.
I know, but it was just to finish the important point. The reason for the instability was because they just ripped up any sense of the rules, any sense of transparency. And so what you've got to do when you borrow for investment, and that's what our plans are, they're about borrowing for investment, including for something called a sovereign wealth fund, where the taxpayer would get the return from that investment. It would benefit the taxpayer by investing in the renewable technology that ultimately will also cut our bills. So we set out a framework to do it. And of course, it has to be within fiscal rules, and it has to be within a framework that is overseen by the Office for Budget of Responsibility. It's a totally different approach. It's a grown-up, it's an adult approach to this, unlike this chaotic approach that we've got from the Conservatives, who just don't have any long-term vision for the country, other than this trickle-down approach, bankers' bonus cuts and things like that, that just will not grow our country or get a fair deal for communities.
Thank you very much for talking to us tonight on Newsnight. Yvette Cooper, Labour's Shadow Home Secretary. Let's hear more from our audience. Hello, good evening.
Hi,
Do introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name's Cameron. I'm 25 and I'm a teacher. I'm a newly qualified teacher.
OK. And what do you think about what politicians from those two main parties were saying?
Well, I think it's the same old from the Conservatives. I think that currently over the past, well, since 2019, I think that they seek division. And I think that's what our politics has turned into. I think what's unfolded since Liz Truss has become Prime Minister has just almost unravelled what, to the population anyway, I think it's unravelled exactly what they are, and they've shown who they are and what their priorities are. I think they're trying to crawl.
Did you not know that before now?
Oh, no, I believe that I knew that, and I think a lot of other people felt that way too. And I think, yes, because of this ideology that they seek division, and it's all about populism. Same with Boris Johnson. I think we need something fresh, something new. That boring politics that people seem to be running away from at the moment. But I think they're calling out for it more now.
Do you pass the microphone down? Hello, hi. It's Aidan, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Hi, and is this your?
This is Ellie, my girlfriend. Yeah.
Okay, you're her boyfriend. So, how have the last few weeks affected you?
I think a lot of people are feeling it in various ways. I think one of the biggest things for us at the moment is we're quite fortunate to be on the housing ladder already. And we're currently going through a remortgaging process, or starting it at least. And already it's becoming clear that the events of the last few weeks are having a massive impact on that, whether it's interest rates or even sort of other bills and stuff that you're obviously seeing an increase in now, energy bills, fuel bills, everything like that.
And who do you hold responsible for that?
Well, obviously it's Liz Truss and the government that she's formed.
So when you hear David Simmons and other supporters of Liz Truss saying there is other stuff going on, there are global problems elsewhere, there's the war, interest rates in the USA higher than here, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I get that, and I know there's obviously external factors that any government has to deal with, but I think what's been clear over the last 6-7 weeks since she's been in power is that they've not made anything any better. In fact, they've actively made it worse. You know, we alluded to there the mini budget. It was absolute chaos. It's been torn up in sort of little over 4 weeks, and now we're starting afresh again. And the MP there said that, you know, they're looking at plans, and if it's a mistake, that they can rectify it. Actually, no, the effects of those mistakes, people live with that now for years to come. It's not just, they can't treat mortgages like prime ministers.
Can I hear from, is it Ellie?
My name is Ellie, yeah. I'm
Hi,
25 and I'm a midwife for the NHS.
Okay, well, let me ask you, Ellie, then. I mean, there is the prospect of public spending cuts or spending not rising as much as inflation, which in real terms would mean cuts. If that happened to the NHS, what impact would that have, do you think?
I think already we're struggling, so if that was to happen, we're just going to suffer as a nation. I think already, I see it every day, staffing is just becoming a crisis, resources. Retention of midwives is a huge factor, particularly in the trust that I'm at, and every other trust in our region is suffering. And I love my job, I don't want to leave my job, but I question whether I'm going to be able to continue the way it's going for the rest of my career. I'm very young and I've spent a long time trying to get to where I am. And it would just be a shame to throw all that because of what's going on at the moment. And
but why do you think you might have, why might you consider leaving?
Just working conditions, pay is not reflected in current inflation. I know this is relevant now because of the increase, 10.1%, but what's it going to be like in the future? Is things just going to keep rising and rising and rising? And for me, I don't know if it's worth it. Like I say, I love my job, but is it worth the suffering that everyone's feeling at the minute?
Thank you very much. Yes, hello. Hi.
Hi, I'm Connor. I'm a teacher.
Oh, sorry, no, I was just going to ask this gentleman here. Sorry, I do beg your pardon. But hold the microphone.
Hello. I'm Chris. I'm a student social worker at the University of Sunderland. I've never known a lower point in politics than what we're experiencing at the minute. The events of tonight have been cataclysmically bad for the Conservative Party. For me, it's not necessarily a question of democracy at the minute, but morality. How can anybody with any morals at all stand by comments and policies that this government have made? Things like Suella Braverman making comments about dreaming of sending Rwandans to, immigrants to Rwanda. The absolute chaos that
But there are
budget...
also policies like the cut in national insurance, the energy help, which, OK, it's going to be 6 months instead of 2 years, etc., etc.
That is like sticking a plaster over a gunshot wound at the minute. It's not working. It's clear that it's not working. The pound is tanked. The economy's crashed. The amount of people now who are subject to poverty is staggeringly, well, poor.
OK. Well, I mean, poverty rates in the northeast have overtaken London and the southeast, certainly according to figures that were published this summer by the End Child Poverty Coalition. We'll be back with you shortly. We are going to talk more about the economy on the day when inflation hit 10.1%, with food prices rising at their highest rate for 40 years. And yet, despite that and the market turmoil, as well as the prospect of austerity coming down the track, as we were just discussing with Ailey, youth unemployment is actually at its lowest level on record. Young adults are working, but getting into the right jobs on the right pay is less straightforward. More of those jobs are low wage, the number of apprenticeships is down a lot, and salaries compare unfavourably to previous generations new to the workforce. Our economics editor Ben Shue reports now from Sunderland on whether the under-30s are paying a heavy price for a fragile economy.
The tools of the trade. But for the young, the hunt for a trade isn't always easy. Apprenticeships were once a reliable route for hundreds of thousands every year into secure and rewarding employment. But the number of under 19-year-olds starting apprenticeships in England has nearly halved over the past 7 years. James is someone who did get an apprenticeship place as an electrician.
An apprenticeship was the way for me, but you look and you think there isn't that many opportunities maybe, but I looked for an apprenticeship for about 8 months before I finally found a successful one. And then obviously I knew once I found one, right, this is my chance to prove yourself.
The UK's youth unemployment rate is currently mercifully low, the lowest on record in fact. Yet that's seen as likely to rise as recession takes hold. Moreover, there are questions about the pay of many of the jobs available to those starting out nowadays. The The evidence suggests younger people are worse paid than previous generations. This shows average hourly pay of people as they move through their working life from 15 to 65. This is those born in the 1950s. This is those born in the 1960s and the 70s and 80s. At age 25, each generation had higher pay than the cohort previously. But that pattern of progress broke down for those born in the 1990s. They earned less at age 25 than those born 10 years earlier. And for young people entering the workforce now, those born in the late 1990s and 2000s, the data suggests a similar pattern of stalled progress. This group of 17 to 19-year-olds are studying health and social care at Sunderland College, all with ambitions to become nurses.
Do you think there should have been more focus on the circumstances of young people?
Definitely. Yeah. And like with prices rising, like it can be quite difficult to manage everything, but with getting our assignments in on time, going to driving lessons, passing your test, paying for petrol, like it just gets loads to manage. And with like prices increasing, like it just causes lots more stress.
I think with now the younger generation compared to decades ago, there's a lot more responsibility, a lot more pressure on us.
The quality of jobs for many younger people today also seems to be different than in the past too. The proportion of people aged 18 to 29 in mid-range paid occupations in the early 1990s was around 45%. That's declined to around 25% over the past 30 years. The proportion of people in their 20s working in low-paid occupations has also risen, from 30% to 35%. Young people entering the jobs market at this moment have a claim to be the unluckiest generation. They've experienced an education system that was hobbled by austerity. And of course, their schooling was badly disrupted by the pandemic as well. And now their crucial early years in the workforce look like they could be scarred by recession. So what needs to happen to turn around the fortunes of this group? One local software entrepreneur who does have many apprentices says the government needs to reform the system.
The raw talent is here, our apprentices are amazing.
What's the obstacle to getting more of them?
One, funding, but two, help us with the capacity challenge. Then there's so much we could do in order to create those opportunities for young people. Untapped young potential. The job for the country as a whole, to do a better job of tapping it than we've done in recent years. Ben Chew, well, we haven't heard too much about levelling up in recent weeks, have we? With the economy teetering on a recession and the prospect of big cuts coming across Whitehall departments, it's a difficult time to be banging the drum for more capital investment. But one champion of the levelling up vision is Henry Morrison, who is the chief executive of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership, which was set up to boost the economy right across the north of England. And welcome to Newsnight. Thank you for joining us. I mean, you've heard from people in the audience, you've heard people on Ben's report. How do you read the situation for people, particularly under 30, who often want to stay in this area, but there aren't that many opportunities?
Well, and what we know is that people in this room and across Sunderland and across the north of England were already £8,000 a year worse off than people down south. There was already a significant incomes gap. And what this pandemic has done...
8,000?
Yeah, so £8,000 in income worse off. So what the pandemic's done and then what this has done is it stalled any progress towards making a difference to that. That was what Boris Johnson promised in that election. They would do something about that. And this government has largely, apart from maybe some of the transport commitments, they have kept some of those alive, I think.
Well, Sunderland got 20 million in the first round of levelling up, competition, but that's it.
That's it. And I think if you look at the schools in Sunderland, they were promised an education investment zone, but unlike the opportunity areas that were created by a previous Conservative government, so we had lots of Conservative governments now, by Justine Greening, there's no real money attached, there's no powers to actually do anything about the challenges here in Sunderland. So lots of great local schools teaching some of the poorest kids in the country. 1 in 10 of the kids in the North East are from long-term disadvantaged homes and from the groups that do worse in education, yet we're doing nothing to get those kids to do better at school.
Well, also, we've got potentially cuts to school budgets coming.
Exactly. So we're going...
Not necessarily in cash terms, but in real terms.
Exactly. And we've already got the issue that the challenges for a school in Sunderland to get that progress, particularly in secondary education, is a real issue. So we talk about trains, we talk about transport and capital investment. New hospitals, for example, those are really important. But skills and education are the real drivers of productivity. And a government that really wants to achieve growth would have focused on the things that really drive our productivity challenge. Because if the rest of the country was performing as well as London, we wouldn't have this anemic growth rate that we heard so much about. Cutting taxes, like the 45p tax cut was designed for people who largely live in London, would have done nothing for Sunderland. And so all the reverses we've seen get us back to a point where we have a sensible debate about how we actually drive growth in this country, because the Prime Minister's original vision would have done nothing for people here in Sunderland.
What do you think of her as Prime Minister?
I think that she is teetering on the brink, and I think, if I'm honest, I'm more interested in what the Chancellor's got to say, because it looks like he's driving the car. And on issues like how we invest in those longer-term challenges, I think that I probably have more confidence in Jeremy Hunt, and it's likely he may outlive this Prime Minister. So that's some stability for the country, but it's not the government people were promised when Boris Johnson was elected. And you've got to really ask, if there isn't a mandate for communities like this, and across the North East who were promised so much, why is she still in government, and why is there still a Conservative government? They need a new mandate, and they need to get back to driving on those issues around levelling up that were the reason they're there in the first place.
And by a new mandate, you mean a general election?
I think it's looking more and more likely that
And
we're
what
going to
about the stability argument?
Well, I think the challenge is that...
Because there wouldn't be stability through a general election campaign.
I think the issue is that the markets clearly have more confidence in the current Chancellor, but they have no confidence in the current Prime Minister. And so if this government is only staying to give market confidence, if they continue to have nights like this, the security of the government being able to continue looks in doubt, and the certainty a general election would provide, I think, comes to the fore. But I think whatever the political arguments, the economic debate about how we get out of this crisis needs to be a serious one. And unfortunately, this government so far hasn't been able to engage with that. It's in recovery mode now, but if it slashes long-term investment, if it slashes budgets in education, then it'll set places like Sunderland even further back than they were before.
And how much do you have concerns about a second round of austerity? And if that does turn out to be the case, what is the point of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership?
Well, I was a local councillor here in the North East during those years, and it wasn't easy, but I can tell you that local government had a lot more money to start with in 2010 than it has now in real spending power terms. So the issue for any government wanting to cut spending is actually where can you go to make those cuts. Health spending now makes up a much larger share of the national pot than it ever did before. And much of the rest of spending, if you're going to reject any cuts to defence, which I think looks likely, it'd be very hard for a Conservative government to do anything other than cut essential public services. And I don't think there's a mandate in Parliament for that either. So I think you're going to have to seriously consider how this government can balance the books. What can it do that's going to genuinely move the dial? I think more devolution, like here in the North East, which is being talked about, to here in Sunderland that doesn't currently have access to some of those things, will make a difference. That wouldn't necessarily cost a lot of money. So the government's going to have to focus on, if it's going to make some tough decisions, how does it protect things like the chances of young people? How does it protect investment in long-term infrastructure? And how does it make sure that the limited money that does get spent gets spent by people here in the North East who know what would work, rather than wasted from Whitehall?
Joshua, hello. I think I'm right in saying you are a Conservative supporter?
Yes, I am. I'd like to talk on a comment before that I thought was unfair about Suella Braverman.
Can I just ask you about what Henry was saying? He says there is no mandate for this government and what it's doing. How do you feel about that? What do you say about that as a Conservative supporter?
I'd say I disagree largely. I think you vote for parties when you vote in elections, and then we've got our party in place.
Who voted for austerity round 2?
I don't think we've seen austerity round 2. There's been no cuts gone through yet, or at all. But no, back to the point about Suella. I think it's very unfair. I think if you look at Suella Braverman, she's a brilliant politician, and what she was proposing is very, like what people may think in this room, very, very popular. Common sense policing, controlling our borders, reducing migration, and stopping the child
She's gone.
Doesn't matter. What she's saying was very, very popular. I think there's some sneering comments, but I think that's very unfair. I think
do you think
people like her,
is going to carry
like
on her
Kemi
agenda?
Badenoch, members like Michael Gove are the future of the party. That sort of right wing, which people in the North East voted for when they voted for Brexit, but we clearly weren't listened to. And what she was pushing.
Sorry, weren't listened to by whom?
By our politicians, clearly.
By our Conservative governments.
If we voted for lower migration, we're not getting that.
Right. Well, whose fault is that?
That's clearly an issue.
Whose fault is that?
I don't know whose issue that is. I don't know whose fault it is.
Well, who's in government and who has been for 12 years?
The Conservatives are in power, but what I'm saying is some comments about Suella Braverman are quite unfair when she does a very good job, and what she's saying is very, very popular, very, very popular with the nation.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Hi.
Hi, I was just thinking, if we are talking about austerity round 2, we need to be really, really worried because there's nothing left to cut. So I think our generation, a third of our lives have been spent under Tory rule, that's meant austerity, public sector cuts. Actually, I'm really worried about the children now who are sliding into poverty, and they're going to face more cuts when there's nothing left to go.
What do you do for a living?
I'm training as an educational psychologist at the moment.
Okay, so tell our audience watching around the country and your fellow audience members here, what kind of families do you help?
So we work with sort of a wide range of families, but I think Hayley is as well. What we've certainly seen recently is families that were just about managing, sliding into poverty and making really, really difficult decisions, and that includes sort of children going to school hungry.
Yeah, I mean, the number of children turning up to school, not having breakfast, not having showers, you know, telling us that they're worried about the parents who, you know, are not eating, not sleeping properly, and coming into school really emotional. How is that child ready to learn? How is that child ready to, you know, engage in education and gain these skills? And what is their hope for the future?
Over here, hello.
Hi, so I'm Beth. I'm 27 and I work in social housing. So just to link to them two there, what we've seen a massive increase in as well as people coming into the social housing area is people are coming that don't have furniture, they don't have white goods, they don't have cookers. It's a bigger picture of, for me, I work part of safeguarding and suicide, and the increase. The question now isn't about heating or eating. The question now is what people are going to do with their own lives, and that's how serious this issue is getting. It's beyond heating or eating. It's what people feel like they're going to do beyond that.
Okay, and that's really alarming. Thank you very much, Beth. I think, are we out of time? What time is it? Yeah, it is. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for coming out this evening. We really appreciate your time. Thank you to this audience in Sunderland and all our guests tonight. I am back tomorrow. Till then, have a very good evening. Good night, Sunderland. Thank you.